During the pre-alpha stages of Rome Total War, CA tried to get a spot at E3. Their publisher, Activision, did not allow them to do so, believing the game stage was too early in its development to be shown publicly. The developers got together, put in their own money and purchased their own spot at E3, hidden away in the corner at the end of a long corridor. It won Strategy Game of the Show. Exceeding expectations is one of the main legacies left behind. The game was years ahead of its time and changed strategy gaming forever. It remains a still widely played game and is argued by many as being the greatest Total War ever. The only counter-argument that really is popular is those who prefer Medieval 2. Or Warhammer 2 I guess now. But why is this? What makes Rome Total War so memorable and nostalgic? In this video I intend to find out why. And to do this I intend to compare it to the other games, the newer titles, particularly Rome 2 Total War. The campaign. Rome Total War released all the way back in 2004, a time when computers were much simpler. Yet despite this, Rome Total War ran relatively smoothly. End turn times were short, lag was rare, and bugs, although present, would rarely actually hinder your game, but instead usually help you as the AI was dumb. As engines have gotten more powerful, CA have pushed Total War further and further, and, in my opinion, a little too far. Some games like Shogun 2 and Three Kingdoms have excellent turn time and run incredibly smoothly, yet others such as Rome 2, Attila and the Warhammer franchise take a ridiculous amount of time. Many computers cannot even begin to run them, even on the lowest graphics settings, especially Rome 2 at launch, which was incredibly demanding on PCs. And this, in my opinion, is a big thing that the new titles fail on, that the old ones did so perfectly. They push the games too far, and yes, they have to push a little bit at times as computers advance, and I believe that now CA are starting to go at a more decent rate. I think Three Kingdoms does run very well on computers, but the leap from Shogun 2 to Rome 2 Total War was far too extreme. And then there is the bugs. These are much more frequent in the newer titles, but that's not the issue, it's the style of the bugs. Rome and Medieval 2 Total War bugs were visual glitches, and when it was a gameplay issue, it would be a mess up on the AI, which would usually work in your favour. But from my personal experience, the bugs in the newer titles can be incredibly game breaking and rather hinder the player. This is the result of the code getting more complex to make games appear flashier. That may be good for sales for CA and Sega, but for the player, we want good gameplay, not a flashy trailer. We want mechanics that function well, not mechanics that sound good but fail in practice. And that's what Rome Total War did. It was a step up in the mechanics and the gameplay features from Medieval 1. Yes, it was much better looking and flashier as well, that is important, having the game look good, but at this point CA needs to concentrate more on the graphics. The newer titles, they look great, but there's no need to improve them right now. Speaking of mechanics, Rome Total War had so many that have since been cut. For example, an active population mechanic which influenced public order, taxes and manpower. Very important mechanics in warfare such as this have slowly been cut away by CA in Total War games, except Three Kingdoms, which seems to be the start of the mechanics making a return. Now yes, the new titles add some mechanics, such as food and enhanced diplomacy options, which are great, but what a Total War needs is all aspects of empire building in the form of campaign mechanics to get the total experience, as it is Total War after all. But not in a way that's super confusing like a Paradox game, it doesn't have to go that far. Historically accurate or not, the colour palette is also incredibly important in my opinion. Many games have proven this. Let's compare the colours of Rome 1 to Rome 2. On Rome 1 side, we have bright red, blue, green and purple for the Romans, and each faction also stands out on the map with its own individual colour. No two factions border each other with a too similar colour. Now Rome 2, and even worse Attila Total War, 20 slightly different shades of green is not great. Most of those greens are mixed with brown, and let's take a look at the yellow faction, the Sassanids in Attila Total War. But it's not yellow, it's yellow mixed with brown. Why is every single colour mixed with brown? It just makes it all blend in together a little too much. It just looks horrible. Yes, we're going for a historical gritty realism look, but it doesn't look good, and games that go for a historical appearance don't do that well. What games should go for is a historical feel, which is quite good in my opinion, but that doesn't mean they have to look historical. Like, I like to see the Roman army have an accurate Roman legion. That's nice to see if it's historically accurate, but we can make the colours a little bit brighter. Rome Total War is so much clearer and simpler, and most of that is simply down to the colour palette. This is something that all newer Total War titles have suffered from. And I get that they have more factions now, so they have less colours to choose from, but they have to at least try to make use of other colours. Having all those different shades of green to represent the European factions is not necessary. One point of interest that I learnt whilst doing the research for this video is that they purposely put in features into the game that would not be discovered until the player has hundreds or thousands of hours put into the game. Features such as being able to move retinue, or that peasants in barbarian invasion generate around 33% less public order than other units, were added into the game as incredibly minor details that the player would not be able to pick up on their first few campaigns, and that adds a great amount of replayability to the game. This does of course exist in the newer titles, but to a much lesser extent, and rather I feel the new titles baby feed the players a little too much when it comes to some of these features. By all means have a good tutorial, but let players find out the smaller details, tips and tricks for themselves. On to the battles. What made Total War unique was the fact that battles and campaign existed in union, each influencing each other. Rome Total War expanded upon Medieval 1 with the battles with the implementation of 3D units. That meant they would increase in detail the more you zoomed in, and would be much more appealing and visible to the player. This is one of the most important features for Rome Total War that made it successful, and all the new titles have this 3D unit system. Then again, if they went back to 2D units, that would be a disaster, and 4D units, I don't even know how that would look or if that would work. Here I just want to praise the game Rome Total War for its technological leap. That's all that section was for. Each battle can be approached many ways, and each Total War fields a diverse variety of units, making battles replayable, which given how many will be fought is extremely important. The new titles do this well, although they put a little bit too much power and emphasis on the auto-resolve. And the fact units can auto-replenish as well on top of this makes the auto-resolve button even more likely to be clicked, as there's not that much of a loss for the player to experience. What's good about Rome is it did not let you take the easy way out. It forced you into the battle map and to fight the battles, but in doing so you got a more total experience of the game. And usually the player did not regret it. Sometimes in my opinion, for the player to have fun, they've got to be forced into doing something they don't like. Just a little bit in some areas, or something they've got to be forced into something that they might find tedious. But it makes the overall experience more enjoyable. And I think that's one thing that Rome Total War did right, that the newer titles kind of fail on. My last point is this: the detail they put into Rome Total War. Take a bit of time, when you load into a battle, to look outside of the map, and remember where this battle is being fought in the overall campaign. Fight the battle near the Colossus, and you will see it on the map. Fight in Rhodes, and you will see Anatolia on one side, and Crete and Greece on the other side. It's just those small attentions to details that were put in these campaign maps that simply is not present in the newer titles, or at least to the extent that it was in Rome Total War. Not only that, but they even put detail onto the unit's shields. And by that I mean the shield has its own hitbox, meaning if you were to rain arrows on the shielded side of a unit, you will do less damage than if you were to hit the unprotected part of the unit. Whereas in other titles, the damage is the same all around, whether you hit the shield or not. Which does take away a little bit of a strategy of how you make units face, like what direction they're gonna face, the angle they're gonna stand on. Yeah, it just takes away from a bit of that. Features like this are important, yet lacking in the newer titles. And this is a recurring point being brought up constantly throughout this video. Features. And that, in my overall concluding opinion, is what makes Rome Total War so great. Features, full stop, that's it. And yes, you will say many Total War titles have added features, and with that you are right, but at the expense of removing other ones, and that is a major issue for many old-time Total War fans out there, and why they, in my opinion, love going back to the good old Rome Total War and Medieval 2 games. The population mechanics, the ability to actually separate your armies and send scouting parties out to deal with some smaller conflicts, the ability to change taxes on each individual settlement. These are all small mechanics in the game, or big mechanics in case of population, that players did enjoy that have been since taken out, either to save them development time, or because it was bugged and they couldn't be bothered to fix it. And that's why Rome Total War, and Medieval 2 Total War as well, were so good. Although it is interesting to see, with the population mechanic and the shield hitbox mechanic starting to finally make a comeback in Three Kingdoms Total War, that CA may finally be bringing back elements that made Total War feel so great. Elements that made Total War feel so total. I've been MELKOR, please like and subscribe if you have enjoyed or learnt something. Until the next time, goodbye.